I never had the privilege of going to his island.
I want to warn lefties not to get too far ahead of yourself declaring victory on Epstein. I think that last week, Democrats had a tremendous victory, and people are really underplaying the extent to which they are.
It's even worse than that. They are actually ending this week early because they're afraid to cast votes on the Jeffrey Epstein issue. The Rules Committee is not meeting because they're afraid to cast votes to release the Epstein files.
Democrats literally made the Speaker of the House give up the tools of his majority for a week because he was too busy, too scared of ruining Donald Trump's cover-up of the Epstein files. That's a ridiculously powerful thing that they did. Now, it's important to remember that they did that with Thomas Massie.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, he's accusing you of trying to inflict political pain on your party by criticizing him for adjourning the House early. Is he right? Are you trying to inflict political pain with this criticism?
I don't know why it should be politically painful to be transparent. Is the pain he's talking about that somebody in our party will be embarrassed by those files? Then that's not a good excuse. Is the pain he's talking about is that legislators, when they vote, have to pick between protecting embarrassment of the rich and powerful versus getting justice for victims? I don't really understand what he means by that. Why is it painful for Mike Johnson to call a vote on this?
So they had somebody on the Rules Committee, a Republican. Thomas Massie at this point is in his don't give a fuck mode. Donald Trump has already spent millions on a primary campaign against him. So what does he have to lose? And this may actually be something that allows him to reclaim the Republican Party from Donald Trump. In conjunction, Ro Khanna, Tom Massie, they pull this off. By the way, there is reporting that Hakeem Jeffries was involved in that he never gets credit for. That's another, we'll come back to that maybe. And so, yeah, you've got Trump still struggling. There was a great report last week from Politico about how Trump, and you and I have been talking about this from the start. Trump, that moment where he said,
"Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years."
I've never seen him not be able to command and redirect attention before, ever in his political career. And we've seen many moments since then, and to some degree, the moments are getting worse. So, for example, last week, he was saying, rather than my relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, I want you to talk about, one, Bill Clinton's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein.
And by the way, I never went to the island, and Bill Clinton went there supposedly 28 times.
Or Larry Summers.
He was the head of Harvard.
2, how great I'm doing. All of my tariffs. 3,
Barack Hussein Obama led a coup
by asking the intelligence community to find out how foreign power attacked the country. He's literally asking, please pay attention somewhere else.
So, and you should mention that every time they give you a question that's not appropriate. Just say, oh, by the way, Obama cheated on the election.
So he is still very much struggling.
The second he started talking about Obama, I was like, oh, he's guilty.
Yeah.
Also, why are you talking about Obama and treason? You got a guy who has sex with teenagers that you are protecting.
There was another report from Washington Post about this and the squabbling within DOJ. One of the things that's happened is that by trying to replace the Epstein focus with the pseudo Barack Obama scandal, he is promising more than DOJ can possibly hope to deliver, short of going full authoritarian.
Look, the president has made it clear that he wanted these documents to be declassified. He wanted the American people to see the truth, and now he wants those who perpetuated these lies in this scandal to be held accountable. As for what accountability looks like, as the director said, it's in the Department of Justice's hands, and we trust them to move this ball forward.
Well, you would agree President Obama cannot be charged based on that immunity.
Again, I'll leave that to the Department of Justice.
He's promising a treason case against Barack Obama. There is no case against Barack Obama. And you're already seeing some warning signs from the same rabid Trump supporters going, if they don't give us Barack Obama's head this time, I'm going to be really furious. And that does say that this may not work. It also says that those people are going to be dangerous. I saw a counterterrorism guy the other day talk about how when you have these transitional moments, when I would call it cognitive dissonance when people who have this utter faith all of a sudden have that faith shattered. They're in a very fragile moment. Many of these people, whether they're QAnoners or whether they're people, Russiagators, whatever you want to call it, both of those people have the potential to be incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, I think it comes mostly from a concern that government might be keeping secrets from them, that the intel community might have some kind of intelligence on government officials, whether it's our intel community or a foreign intel community.
And the fact that Trump isn't going to fulfill either of their demands for justice is at once useful because it creates a fracture in his base, but it is also dangerous.
We are going to try to get to the bottom of what's knowable now that they're telling us there's no there there. I mean, for me, that's just a red cape in front of a bull.
It's not something we should think lightly of.
And so we are definitely getting phone calls. People are interested in knowing the facts. They don't want us to drop the investigation.
It is, in fact, the case that Donald Trump is still struggling.
I never had the privilege of going to his island, and I did turn it down, but a lot of people in Palm Beach were invited to his island. In one of my very good moments, I turned it down. I didn't want to go to his island.
However, what we saw last week is how he intends to do this cover-up. And how he intends to do the cover-up is Pam Bondi in March, so before Ghislaine Maxwell first appealed her prosecution to the Supreme Court back in April, Pam Bondi spent thousands of people hours to go through and sort through all the Epstein files. Over the course of that, she made a list not only of the times that Donald Trump showed up in the Epstein files, but also the times that other famous people like Bill Clinton and Larry Summers. And so she would come out with that with a sense of how much risk Trump was at and how much dirt they had on people Trump wanted to attack. That would be the outcome of that 2-week search where she spent 1,000 people's time to go do this job. And then Maxwell appealed, and DOJ for a while, John Sauer, Trump's other defense attorney, stalled on whether or not they were going to defend the case. And then literally at the moment this whole process begins, the week before DOJ says, well, we're going to defend the Maxwell prosecution, that's when they released this stupid memo from Pam Bondi. And that's when Trump says, are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein?
This guy's been talked about for years.
Because this has always presented a problem for him. His mob very much wants something on Jeffrey Epstein. They've been promised that by Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. They didn't realize the risk to Donald Trump that posed. And yet Maxwell has something on Donald Trump that seems really interesting, and she doesn't want to stay in prison any longer. And so what we see, DOJ does defend the sentence on July 14th. And that day, her attorney, David Marcus, is like, Donald Trump has reneged on a deal. And in context, he's talking about the plea deal back in 2007 with Jeffrey Epstein. But it's a double entendre, right? We have a deal. Maxwell has a deal. And Donald Trump reneged on that. And then the very next day is when the first Wall Street Journal story comes out. That's when Donald Trump fires Maureen Comey, the champion of the victims.
Obviously, her last name stands out. She is a Comey. She is the daughter of James Comey, who was fired famously by the president in 2017 and with whom the president has quite a relationship right now. Maureen Comey sent a note to colleagues, former colleagues today, obtained by CBS News, and she has all kinds of warnings papered into this statement, including that she's concerned about what is seeping into the Department of Justice right now if a career civil servant can be prosecuted unilaterally without cause.
She writes, where without fear may be the challenge. If a career prosecutor can be fired without reason, fear may seep into the decisions of those who remain.
The Wall Street Journal story comes out on Thursday.
The Wall Street Journal published a piece with this striking headline. Jeffrey Epstein's friends sent him bawdy letters for a 50th birthday album. One was from Donald Trump. Now, their friendship, you'll recall, went back decades.
The next day, Donald Trump goes after the grand jury transcripts, sues Rupert Murdoch by name. And then a week later,
we are just learning this hour that Jeffrey Epstein's ex-girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, was granted limited immunity in order to talk with Trump's personal attorney, turned Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche.
Now, because Pam Bondi went through all those files, she has a list of names that Todd Blanche can ask her about. And that's actually what David Marcus said happened. He said she was asked about 100 names. So that list of names, right, we can go and demand that list of names. She was asked about 100 names. Guess what names are not going to be on there? Donald Trump. Dershowitz, not going to be on there. Really interesting question whether Prince Andrew is going to be on there. I think if you don't have any Prince Andrew dirt, it won't be believable, but nevertheless, that might cause international incident. There are a number of other Trump associates who were quite close to Maxwell. Those names aren't going to be on there either. And so Blanche asks her about people like Bill Clinton. This is what I'm imagining happening. This is how you pull off a cover-up. Asks her about Larry Summers. Trump seems very interested in what she had to say about Larry Summers. And, fuck him, man. If he was involved in this, fuck him. But this whole time, Todd Blanche hasn't even reached out to the victims. And apparently one of the victims' lawyers said, can I be there at the proffer with Maxwell? That was refused. So by last Friday, Todd Blanche knows what Maxwell has to offer to get out of prison. And Trump keeps getting asked questions and so on and so forth. And I do think that this is a remarkable moment with Donald Trump, but I also think that the amount of power that Blanche and Trump have means they can pull this off if they want to, right?
Maxwell's attorney just said this about a potential pardon from Trump.
We haven't spoken to the president or anybody about a pardon just yet. And listen, the president this morning said he had the power to do so. We hope he exercises that power in the right and just way.
Blanche has already gotten the Supreme Court to say Donald Trump can pardon Maxwell to prevent her from saying, and this is hypothetical, I'm not saying she knows this about him, to prevent her from saying that Donald Trump slept with a live child, a dead child or something. Something, the most outrageous thing, the Supreme Court has already told us that if he pardons Maxwell, we can't inquire into his motives for doing so. I had a theory when Jack Smith defended that appeal that there were some pardons that they thought about charging, and this was a test of what the Supreme Court would say. And the Supreme Court has already said, Donald Trump can pardon Ghislaine Maxwell if he wants. Doesn't matter if he's doing it as part of extortion. Doesn't matter if he's doing it to silence her. He can do that. And Blanche, because he's pretending he is serving as Donald Trump's defense attorney, but he has the power of prosecution. He can also offer her a witness deal and say, because of this help you gave us implicating Bill Clinton,
You should focus on Clinton.
we will spring you from prison early. There's almost nothing that can stop that except politics. And so I went through and thought of some political leverage that we have now. And I'll start with
conservative Republican Congressman Eric Burlison of Missouri.
One of the Freedom Caucus people over the weekend said,
what I would be opposed to is giving any kind of clemency or pardon. That's not something that I think that any Republicans are going to be willing to do.
Yeah, so that's my next question, because Trump has not ruled out a pardon for Maxwell. Do you think that would be a mistake for Trump to pardon her?
I do. I think it would be a mistake.
This is the same thing we saw with the January 6th pardons, where people were like, oh no, he shouldn't pardon. And then after Trump did, they just crawled into their hole and did nothing about it. This is the moment where you can call up Republicans and say, if Donald Trump pardons Maxwell, a sex predator, to make his own scandal go away, will you impeach him? Will you impeach him for abusing the pardon power to pardon a sex predator to make his own problems go away? You're not going to get answers from any of them, but that is a conversation we need to start having. Not just, would you support a pardon? And by the way, Mike Johnson was sort of like, well, it's up to Donald Trump if he pardons a sex trafficker. We need to raise the cost of that in a way we did not succeed in doing with January 6th, with the January 6th pardon. So that's one thing. One tool to use, and one of the reasons why Democrats have been effective, I talked earlier about Tom Massey, his important role of this, but one of the reasons Dems have been more effective than they have in the past is because his mob, at least still a significant portion of his mob, provided the mob for this.
Time for Bondi, Cash, and Bongino to resign?
In other words, like, Democrats never had a great ability to meet Trump's mob, going back to 2016 when they tried, and they've given up trying. They've just completely given up. You know, we've talked about our cat turd deficit. But because we were on the same side for that period as Trump's mob, as the QAnon people, that gave Dems more power to drive the focus than they otherwise would have. So once they all get on board, then that may change. But even some of the big ones, including Cat Turd. Cat Turd is sort of like withdrawing from trolling to spend more time with his rescue dogs. I kid you not, that's literally what he said. Until they all get on board, there is still this opportunity, this weight from them. So that's one. The second one is victims. I said that Trump and Todd Blanche are really blowing off the victims here.
She had no remorse in her voice. Ghislaine has no soul. And you know yourself what I've been through trying to take her down. And the reason why I've had to go through that is because she's a dangerous human being. She will reoffend, and reoffend. These people never stop, ever.
The more that we can foreground their stories, MSNBC is doing a very good job of this, the more we can get them describing how Maxwell is a predator and not just Jeffrey Epstein. I think you add pressure and you really remind people what this is about. Donald Trump has people believing he and Maxwell are the victims here, and that couldn't be more obscene to claim that he and Maxwell are the problem. Let's keep the focus on the victims, and let's keep reminding people that Todd Blanche blew them off. Blanche has made requests before 3 judges for grand jury testimony. Last week, Seamus Hughes, who's brilliant at this, found the one in Florida. And in that case, an Obama appointee basically said, you're asking me to do something I can't do, and I can't do it. But by the way, I'm going to keep this case. So you don't say, give it to Aileen Cannon and ask her to do something. One of the things I haven't seen mentioned, by the way, is that there were 2 grand juries in Palm Beach. One was a 2005 grand jury and one was a 2007 grand jury. Now, we know that there was a 60-count indictment that was obtained, but not yet filed in 2007. What we don't know is whether that came from the 2005 grand jury, meaning, like, say they sat in November of 2005 and they got a 6-month extension, and that brings you to the point where you have the 60-count indictment, or whether the prosecutors needed to get a new grand jury to focus on Epstein, or, and this is what I haven't seen anyone consider, or there's somebody else that they presented evidence to in a second grand jury. 2 grand juries, that judge said, I'm keeping this case, you can't have it. It's possible that Blanche will appeal to the 11th Circuit. The standard in the 11th Circuit is very high, so that leaves you with the SDNY cases. And one of them, Richard Berman, who had the 2 different judges, 2 different cases, and one, there's somebody new assigned because the judge who presided over Maxwell's trial is now on the 2nd Circuit. But Richard Berman, who was supposed to preside over the Epstein case, when Epstein killed himself, Berman gave the victims an opportunity to speak.
Today, nearly 24 of Jeffrey Epstein's accusers packing a Manhattan courtroom. Their message clear. He may be dead, but their quest for justice is still alive.
So he sat there in his courtroom hearing from one after another victim talking about how they had been deprived justice. And he, in his order for DOJ to basically do some homework about how they could possibly do this, kept saying, both people said, did you even ask the victims? And it was a few days until there were signs that the victims actually were involved in this process. So Blanche just totally blew off the victims. One of the victims' attorneys say, I said, they asked, can we participate? He said no. And so those judges may have some tools to prevent anything really haywire, but Donald Trump can pardon, we already did this. Donald Trump can pardon Maxwell. There is nothing to stop Donald Trump from pardoning Maxwell except political pressure.
A lot of people are asking me about pardons. Obviously, this is no time to be talking about pardons. It's something I haven't thought about. It's really something. It's something I'm allowed to do it.
It is true that Todd Blanche has a lot of power. It is true that David Marcus, who is a formidable lawyer, is doing a very good job of shifting the story to what Donald Trump wants it to be already, right? So the day after the first proffer, Thursday and Friday of last week, all of a sudden, magic, you have Wall Street Journal do a story that is talking about the people that Donald Trump wants to talk about. Bill Clinton is in there, Larry Summers, right? Like magic, Wall Street Journal sources shifted their focus from Donald Trump to the people that Donald Trump wants to implicate. I suspect that is not a surprise. It wasn't a surprise to me. Other places of political pressure, though, other ways where Todd Blanche may fuck this up. Pam Bondi, when she did that review, she had 1,000 people review those files. They put those files on a SharePoint server. They didn't limit access. And as you probably know, SharePoint has been hacked. There was a 0-day released in this period. And so we know there's at least 1,000 people who saw some of those materials. And by the way, she did nothing to protect the victims' identities there. So you have 1,000 people who are reading and looking at this just, industrial scale abuse of girls, and they all had to look at it. Those people have some idea of what's in there. So those people have some idea how many times Donald Trump showed up in those files. If Todd Blanche starts telling a story that's very different from that, those people may, say, be subpoenaed. But by putting it on that server in a really insecure way, A, it could have been hacked. B, it could have been accessed by Elon Musk's Doge boys. One thing that not enough people have talked about is, how did Elon know that Trump was in the files? One, because it was obvious. Two, because Maxwell told him, remember that he was chummy with Maxwell. Three, because his Doge boys found that list. Or four, because somebody like Kash Patel told him. Those are all possibilities, and I think it remains an interesting question how Elon Musk knew about that. One other point of pressure that's out there is that Epstein's executors, I think one of them is his brother, but his executors hit the book and all these other materials was, if it was ever fully in DOJ custody, the book is in the hands of the estate. And so anybody with subpoena power can subpoena the entire book. And so, Donald Trump is still trying to say, well, I didn't write that letter. I've shown that in 2016, when he got a really analogous request from Aras Agalarov, it went through his then assistant, Rona Graff. And we would expect the same thing to happen in 2003. And, who knows, maybe Don Jr. did that drawing or somebody else did that drawing. But apparently there's this whole economy of rich and famous people putting together these books. And in Donald Trump's case, we know that it would go through his assistant. And we know that sometimes people would say, here's a suggestion for what I want you to do. And it gets turned back and then put into a book with Donald Trump's signature as pubic hair. So all of those are points of pressure. And I raise those because there is an opportunity to, Donald Trump in Scotland, right? Still trying to make this story go away. And every time he opens his mouth, one, he looks stupid. He says, oh, here's a list of 3 things I want you to talk about instead of Jeffrey Epstein. That gives up his magic power of being able to get people to chase a story because of their passion rather than just a straight up command. So he looks stupid, but also today he was asked, and he gave a new explanation for why he and Epstein had a falling out around 2004 after the birthday book. And he said,
he stole people that work for me. I said, don't ever do that again. He did it again. And I threw him out of the place, persona non grata. I threw him out, and that was it. I'm glad I did, if you want to know the truth. And by the way, I never went to the island, and Bill Clinton went there supposedly 28 times.
And my guess is what Trump was saying. My guess is the story that Trump almost told on camera today is that we know Epstein was recruiting at Mar-a-Lago, And so when Trump says he hired somebody, my guess is what Trump means is Epstein recruited people from Mar-a-Lago. And if he did that, we know he did that once, but if he did that a second time, that would be, that would suggest that Epstein was using Mar-a-Lago as a hunting ground for young women that he could turn into, sex slaves or what have you. But again, Donald Trump is still struggling, and every time he opens his mouth, he doesn't have as much control over himself as he used to anyway. It's just he's getting old, he's tired, what have you. But this Epstein thing is driving him crazy, so it's not going away. But I tried to give a list of pressure points, starting with the victims. Like, let's make sure that the story of the victims remains at the forefront, where we can continue to apply pressure so that he and Todd Blanche can't just make his sex scandal go away.